So D major chord, D pentatonic. A minor chord, just use a minor pentatonic. So one thing you might try is add just one little note in between of those 5 notes from the pentatonic scale. Let's have a listen. So this is a chromatic note. I add to those 5 notes from the pentatonic scale. Chromatic notes can be seen as notes that don't fit the scale you're playing in. So in this case, notes not found in the scale of D major. A place this works like a charm is between the 2nd and the 3rd note. This note can be called a blue note, the minor 3rd in a major context. This adds just a little bit of spice or flair into the mix. And do you know what? We created the blues scale. I made a full video about it, by the way. Feel free to check it out over here. Anyway, this is how it sounds. So just to put it out there, I'm keeping all the examples as straightforward and easy as possible because I remember all too well that lesson at the conservatory where I went just like, oh yeah, just play D Mixolydian and a chromatic note from here. Okay, cool. See you next week. So I don't want that. I'm just playing as easy and straightforward as possible. For a minor chord, we can use the minor blues scale. And then we put that little blue note in between the 4 and the 5, like B minor blues. Lovely. By the way, what we're doing is not a beginner to pro kind of thing. These are just different options. We're branching out, like exploring different sounds. Anyway, a next stage could be to turn that pentatonic or blues scale into a diatonic scale. So not 5, not 6, but 7 different notes. Diatonic is just a fancy word that entails scales like major or minor, and even the modes you might have heard about like Dorian, Mixolydian, Lydian. So let's jump into the good old major scale. A scale with 7 unique notes, so even more notes to create tension with. And besides the pentatonic scale, this is probably the most obvious pick to play over just a major chord. So before we continue with the logical road, I really want to touch upon too the Lydian mode, D Lydian. Sounds kind of nice, right? Very open and bright. It's almost the same as the major scale, but now that 4th note is just played 1 fret higher, the sharp 4, 1, 2, 3. So that sounds lovely over just a D major chord. If you're new to this, you can think of playing an A major scale or an F sharp minor scale and just play that in a D context, like a... or F sharp minor. But always think of the notes in relation to the D. So although that Lydian is quite an interesting sound, you don't hear it that often. A second and more obvious pick would be Mixolydian, immediately transporting us to that more bluesy realm. Mixolydian. So now the only thing we changed from the major scale is that 7th note. We lower that by one semitone to a flat 7. And we get that sound. And I tried spicing it up a little bit with the blues scale, the major blues scale. That works like a charm. Anyway, time to ease up a bit, dial back. Now we have a bunch of options to play over just one chord, but it's time to add something else in the mix. Let's add a chord often seen in the key of D major. The G. So now we got a 1-4 chord progression in the key of D. So now what do we do? So the first option might surprise you, just ignore it. Yeah, play from the heart and use your ear and just see what comes out. So never think this is worth less or somehow inferior. This is actually a good way to start improvising, and funny enough, it's probably also something that everyone strives for as sort of an end goal, to just play by heart. Know so many things, but when you start playing, just forget about everything and just play. Anyway, this is still the early stages, so let's just forget about it. Sounds. Just sounds way too obvious, right? So it's not really interesting. But you can use these target notes really well to, for example, end licks with, because it shows you are aware of the chords that are underneath it and you are just on top of your game. So that lick I played over here, I think that worked really well actually with this progression. So this way of looking at chord progressions will get you through the majority of all backing tracks, pop songs nowadays, because they use the diatonic chords only. Chords built from notes just within the scale, in this case D major. The chords found when we harmonize the major scale. So these chords are in key of D, D major, or D, E minor, F sharp minor, G, A, B minor, C diminished, or usually we play it as a seventh chord, so it becomes half diminished, or minor 7 flat 5, and then D major, A, B minor, G major. So now I only used the pentatonic scales of the chords that we're playing. And believe it or not, all the notes I played still belong to the D major scale. Just 7 unique notes of everything I played just now. That's amazing, right? If you think so too, just gently squeeze that like button if you're just excited about this stuff as I am. It means a lot for me, it's free for you, it's good for karma. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going well so far, but there's always a point where you encounter a chord that somehow just doesn't seem to fit in. And it can be many things, a borrowed chord, modal interchange, an outside chord. And when that happens, you'll hear that one or more notes from the scale you were playing just seem to clash with that chord that's playing. So I had this very recently with a track when a buddy of mine, Rotem Sivan, you know him from this video where he taught you some sweet old jazz. I mean, he asked me to play a solo on his upcoming record, and he had a chord progression that sounded like this. So it's D to G and G minor. So what happens when we just play over it and ignore it? Ooh, wait a second. Oh, that's not good. So what's happening? So we hear a D chord followed by a G, still diatonic chords, but then a G minor chord. So that G minor is not a diatonic chord. It's a strange chord. So what's happening? Well, only one thing changes. The B becomes a B flat. So now we got multiple options. And option 1, and this is the easiest, but it's not my favorite, by the way, but more on that later. We sort of superimpose the G minor pentatonic scale over that chord. So we stick to D pentatonic mostly, and then when the G minor happens, I'm so excited. Let's jump to the G minor pentatonic scale. It sounds like this. D major pentatonic. This is a lovely way to start exploring switching scales and modes and all the things you've got. You have to be aware of the chords. It's fun, but it's also very tricky if you've never done this before, because you just can't miss it, because then everyone will know you messed up because it just sounds horrible. So one tip for this is try finding the patterns more or less in the same place where you were playing, because this way you can just extend the lines you were playing already and change them to the new scale instead of just having to start all over when that weird chord's happening. One example, just let me overdo it wrong. D, D, and then G minor. D major, right? Oh, G minor. So that way you're just too focused on the chord and you neglect your musical lines entirely. So always make them flow through the changes and just make it sound great. But I'd love to show you one more option. So I always try to see how that new note, that B flat in this case, how it fits in the scale I was already playing. So let's take again that D major pentatonic scale. What if we only changed that one note, the B flat? So don't play G minor pentatonic over the G minor chord, but just play D major pentatonic, but then see what notes clashes. And it's the B, because the B becomes a B flat. And then we get a cool little scale. It's sort of... I don't know, I don't think it has a scale really. It's sort of harmonic major, but then we don't play the 7th. So it's just like 1, 2, 3, 5, flat 6. So that way we link the sound of what we played even more to the new chord that's happening, and it doesn't become too obvious. Let's try it. Let's see if we can work it out. This is really my go-to method. I try to change the least notes as possible so the sound stays connected to what I'm playing before. And the coolest thing I discovered is playing that D major pentatonic with that lower 6 just sound awesome too when you're just playing it on the D major chord. I mean, this... It's just so awesome. So we're circling back to the first bits of this video. And now I hope you see it's all just endless loops of discovering, exploring, finding new sounds, creating different feelings, emotions, and all while doing this, understand what's happening. It's an easy way to really give things a place. At least for me it is. It works great for me. But as I said, never underestimate the power of just playing by heart and ear. Because when you learned a new concept, like maybe something you learned in this video, your ear might tell you a lot of new, fresh ideas in the future to work with, right? So it's all like putting